Welcome to Getting to the Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee, and this is on MTR Podcast. My next guest is a freelance reporter in Baltimore and graduate student studying city and regional planning at Morgan State University. Go Bears. Shout out, shout out. He previously served as an editor for the Baltimore Business Journal and the daily news website Baltimore Fishbowl. Most recently, he has written for Bloomberg City Lab, Next City, Baltimore Magazine, and the Outlaw Report. Please welcome Ethan McLeod. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hey, Rob. Thanks for having me.
This is great. I'm glad we were able to connect because it's rare. In the many episodes that I've done of this podcast, I kind of get a nice swath of people who are doing various things within the city, whether it be photographers, whether it be visual artists. But I think it's been very limited the amount of reporters and kind of people in that journalistic space that I've spoken to. So let's learn more about what you do. Give us those vital stats. Where'd you grow up? How'd you get started? Give us the rundown. How'd you get to Baltimore? Come on, give us the rundown.
Right. Yeah, I tell people all the time. I grew up in Northern Virginia, very close to Dulles Airport out in Herndon. I tell people all the time. I never really thought as a kid, even all the way up through high school, that I'd be living in Baltimore as an adult, but I love it here. So grew up in Herndon, went to college at DC area at American University, studied communications there. I was always into writing through high school, but started studying communications, joined the student newspaper at American, the Eagle, represent, got my feet wet in reporting. Took the first reporter job I was offered out of school after doing a few internships, and I was working in my hometown, and I'm sure a lot of other reporters can share a similar story. Have just, I don't want to say bounced around, but, moved from one thing to the next. I got to Baltimore when I was working in Silver Spring. My wife's parents actually retired here, and we would come up and we would visit them. We loved just the vibe we got from the city, getting out and exploring a bit. And we said, why not try and make the change? It's tough to get by in DC doing something you love. I got a job at Fox 45 and did that for about half a year, working the web desk there, and then landed at Baltimore Fishbowl, where I got to help grow the site, expand its digital focus. I don't know if many of our listeners read the Fishbowl, but if not, you should check it out. It's a great locally owned and locally focused news source. Got a chance to freelance at some other outlets while I was there. Baltimore City Paper, rest in peace, and just connect with others in the city. So basically, I've just deepened my roots here through reporting and storytelling. Before my current phase, now I'm a full-time graduate student, but I spent about a little less than 2 years working for the Baltimore Business Journal as the associate editor, doing print duties and writing daily coverage as needed. I've just been spreading my wings a bit since I went back to school to study city planning, and have been freelancing around. It's been fun. It's a bit, every week is different. So,
we like having different. We like having just things that make it seem interesting. I think if you go to whatever your day job may be, whether it is your passion, whether it does have that level of interest for you, if it feels like I'm just doing the same thing every day, it gets like a bit dry, a bit stale. But if it's like it's different every day and it's like different challenges, different problems to solve, different things to absorb, that makes it like interesting, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, the news isn't really, they're doing a daily full-time role in news. It's never really monotonous, but after a while, especially with a weekly paper, things do fall into a routine. And the last 2 months for me, since kind of going out on my own while being back at school, it's literally every day is sorting out something different.
So describe some of those experiences working between I know like Fishbowl. I think that there's a few images of myself in an article there from a couple of years back. We'll talk about that at a later time. And the Baltimore Business Journal as a reporter. So being involved in And with those two publications and being a reporter and kind of being able to see Baltimore from a certain vantage point, how do you see Baltimore? What is your take on Baltimore? And obviously someone that has been transplanted here. How have you been seeing it?
Sure. I mean, think of me getting here in 2016. How I guess it was so focused on the criminal justice stuff, especially working at a TV station. It takes a few years to gain a sense of the power dynamics. So that's something that I would say is the narrative arc of all the positions I've worked in. By the time I became an editor for the BBJ, and after, say, a year of doing it, you really gain a strong sense of how decisions are made in this town. It's not always, the textbook, what am I trying to say? Like you think of campaign donations and that influences decision-making. It's much more subtle than that. It's a very entrenched power structure that we have here. And that includes for business interests exerting their influence on city leaders. Just think of the weight of a downtown real estate broker talking to a city official about what they view as the most pressing problems and how that might differ from what folks in another side of town who lived here their whole lives would say are the most pressing problems. And which of those things captures the interests of those making decisions and influencing public policy the most? The cynic in me would say, it's the brokers, it's the downtown business interests that really do get their say out there a bit more. Of course, I think I have an entirely different impression of how the city works in terms of capturing neighborhood leaders and what they know to be true about how things work. I think we are always hoping elected leaders will listen to them more, think of life on the ground a bit more than always the bigger economic picture. Because, for example, gun violence is something, if you look at it from a higher lens view, it seems like this intractable problem. How can you possibly solve it? You just look at it in terms of numbers. That's how a lot of decisions are made. Meanwhile, you have neighborhood and grassroots organizations and even just community ties, informal, dealing with conflicts on their own. I think Safe Streets has been a perfect example of how that can really work successfully. So it's a lot of what's under the surface that is driving the success of the city. And that's something that I think I've captured over the years, editing and writing here. It's a lot of the behind the scenes stories, and those are the ones you really want to dig up, not the low hanging fruit.
Absolutely. I find myself getting into like conversations on what's happening here, and people seem to focus on the low hanging fruit. And, it's great to hear that. No, what's that next level? What is the next thing? Why? The what if, the so on, those continued questions. Like what I do, I'm an analyst. So I continually ask the questions. Why is this happening? Why, what does the data say? Like going to a source, let's say that may be a source of truth, to try to get down to maybe why, what is this telling us or what have you? And, or just using your eyes and seeing like where I'm at, the neighborhood that I'm in, it's considered blighted and all of that different stuff on the surface, but really it's a move to influence people who are living here to move out. And that is attached to a large institution here that maybe has an interest and wants to have property for their residents and their students to go to. And that's kind of that. And it's like, how is it, so dangerous and so on? Not saying that it's not, but help me understand, like, how is it dangerous in a place where you're making only really residential property? So you're making spaces for people to live in, but then the narrative is it's dangerous. And, one of the things that I've encountered that I kind of look down on, it's like your cities, your places like this. In terms of Baltimore, let's be very honest about it. Baltimore is the thing that draws people into the state. If people aren't going to check out Carroll County, unless they're probably into like lynchings, I don't know, but which is terrible. But also, it's not got a great reputation. But if you're coming into the state to go to Baltimore, but then there's that weird relationship, kind of how Atlanta and Georgia is, that Baltimore is outside of Maryland, but unless it's used as a punching bag from the state, unless Hogan wants to take shots and things of that nature. But it's really odd how it has to be some economic benefit from businesses wanting to do their business in Baltimore and people moving into the city. But also you only hear about the dangers that are happening here, a city under siege and so on, specifically like what I hear nightly on Fox 45. Like it's really challenging for me to swallow with my analytic brain. Like, hold on, what? How is it both?
Yeah. What you're describing, I remember interviewing now Mayor Brandon Scott when he was running, when it was, I think we were past primary season, so he had already won the primary, but I remember asking him for an interview for the Business Journal about whether he thinks it's about attracting a huge company to town and that's going to be the savior. I remember the HQ2 sweepstakes for Amazon years ago, and whether that is something he views as the most critical thing, or if it's really about fostering existing businesses here, which reminds me of your real estate analysis example. Yeah. And yeah, I remember him candidly saying, it's not going to be some outside corporate savior. It's going to be the businesses that have come up here and have their journey already. And that's something that I just genuinely believe about the city, that, our most pressing problems, it's going to be the people here who solve them. It's not always going to, it's just very unlikely to me that it's going to be some force from above or outside that's going to bring us the answer. And that's tough because it's harder. It's a tougher pill to swallow, but, I think the resources are already here. It's about lining them up. So.
Yeah, I think lining them up and really doing things in an equitable way. That's something that from that state top down kind of level, we don't see as much. And we've seen, at least, especially like in the arts community, right, where the funding was really weird at a point. And it's like not really hitting those places where it should hit. Like, all right, guys, you might want to take a look at that. How's these funds being allocated? Or I think the other observation there is the nature of, I think, a lot of Baltimoreans. We're not the most, we're open, but also we seek that authenticity. We seek that integrity. And if we feel like you're coming in and you don't have that integrity, whether it be an individual, whether it be a business, it's hard to be accepted as being a part of it, because there are places and there are artists, there are different people who've come here and have lived here for a certain amount of time. And it's like, okay, you've gotten your check, you got your purple check. It's like a version of Instagram, but for Baltimore. But other people just come in. It's like, I want to be the savior. I want to be the face and so on. And it's like, no, we don't believe you. You need more people. It's like, we need something more from you.
And that's something I think about a lot as a transplant. I am not a Baltimore native, and there's so much I'm always learning. And yeah, a part of it, I mean, I think my wife and I are here. We feel like we're lifers. We love it genuinely, but it is about being aware of, how am I coming across? Do I think I have the answers, or what I'm telling you now is just what I believe to be true? That's a base. But not going to say as the outsider who came in to report on and write about and learn about the city that I know. It's just about who do you know to listen to.
Absolutely. So like kind of maybe stepping back into a little bit more deep and pointedly, what do you consider the role of the reporter to be, and of someone that's like covering a particular scene? You can speak specifically if you want to talk about the art scene or the scene larger in the city. And how is that role maybe changed in your mind over the last like maybe 3 to 5 years?
Oh, well, I'll start with just saying, I think beat reporters have their beats. It's not as fun to get to pick and choose every story you want to do. But if you're a full-time reporter for the Baltimore Sun, you have a job that's preordained. You have to follow those things as they happen. You do get some discretion for when you want to do features or, elevating things. And so, beyond the necessities of the job, if you work in a daily full-time role, I would say the job of the reporter is otherwise to elevate the good ideas, to elevate, I remember Catherine Pugh going on a rant about how media was shaping the narrative in the wrong way. That's a very disingenuous way to look at it. And I remember a lot of us were just sitting and shaking our heads like, is that really what you think? But, not in a disingenuous way. We only need to elevate the good ideas, but when you get an opportunity to, you can combat that narrative that, the city's always falter. And think about it this way. The city was, as you noted, that was and is the economic engine of Maryland, but it didn't always have these very nefarious issues. And so the second those started happening, it always seemed like it's declining from a status quo that people really romanticize. But it's media's job to remind folks, you know what, there's still some really beautiful things, some brilliant minds doing great work here. So, and then specific to arts, I would say the demise of City Paper a few years ago completely changed how that stuff gets covered. Be More Art has done an absolutely wonderful job plugging some of that. It's only one, it's a quarterly print outlet with a website. It can't do everything. So I would say that made, and I'd be curious what you think as someone really looped in with that community, but I would say it made it, every story that would get run on something arts related was at a premium, because the production of media coverage of the arts completely dropped off after City Paper disappeared. And at Fishbowl, we tried to, I would go to something that is definitely not my expertise. I would go to an opening at AVAM or go to this gallery, and somebody mentioned it to me and I thought it was really cool, but definitely I'm not a trained arts writer. So I think that speaks to the state of media, of arts media in town. If you got somebody like me covering, City Hall and small businesses and neighborhood stuff, also going to art openings, it's almost a point of desperation. I think, though, again, the Be More Arts of the city and those with their ear to the ground, Baltimore Beat, had some really great coverage going while they were up and running. We obviously just hope for more of that.
Yeah, I think it being accessible too, like your assessment around City Paper is huge. That was something that free publication, you get it. When I was commuting years back, commuting down to DC, that would be something I would take with me. And that DC has their own version of it, and it's like, can we kind of keep this rocking and rolling? Or even further back, like the Examiner, those other free publications that you would just find things that are quote unquote on the fringe, aren't the larger, more publicized things. I would find out about, like what bands are coming here to these venues that I would find out about different things that are happening in the scene. And it felt accessible where, I've been covered in the City Paper for a few different things and the Examiner and so on. And when the City Paper went the way of the dodo, then the weekend paper or whatever that is just didn't really kind of serve that same audience and do it in the same way that there's a degree of credibility. And going back to that thing I was saying about authenticity here, who's this new thing? We don't like you. We don't know you, but we don't like you. Whereas, at least that's the assessment that I've gotten. And whereas it's like, City Paper, it's like, you're coming back, right? That's kind of the vibe I feel like that's sitting there. And there definitely is a gap that certain either bloggers and certain publications here are trying to fill, but it's too large to say you're a segment within a larger publication that's covering all of these different things that are Baltimore related. You can't have like the slither. You need something that's really hitting those different areas. And I feel like you also kind of get it, some of the news maybe in these different outlets that are in the scene. Like you go to Station North, you may go to a coffee shop or something and you might see an upcoming event, but it's literally more guerrilla marketing oriented than it being in a publication. And I get it that those things take money, but I'm always very like, what's the focus here?
One thing that we really noticed at Fishbowl when I was working with Brandon Weigel as my editor there for some time, the power of a calendar listing, of what that can do. It doesn't have to be a full feature or an essay. It can just be a thoughtful calendar listing, maybe some humorous phrasing or whatever, something that suggests some familiarity with the subject. And that is that's a high efficiency, low cost thing that media can do that's kind of that guerrilla approach you're talking about. Hey, the editor saw this in a coffee shop because they go there, because they know where to look. Yeah. And that's the value of that.
Because I think if you're in there, like some people, like when I go to any place, right, whether it be going to a bar, I'm going to the pretentious beer section, like, what do they have here? Or if I'm going to a coffee shop while they're making my ridiculous coffee and procuring my Rody Boy or whatever I'm getting, right, I tend to go over there to where are the business cards at? Where are the little thing? Oh, that's a business that does that. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, really? And this is kind of supplementing what I was getting from like a city paper, but knowing where to look. And naturally, out of interest, I gravitate towards that to even maybe look for potential guests. Oh, I would love to interview them. They do this. They bring the dead back to life. Hell yeah, let's do it. They're interesting. Yeah. So in your experience, how do you know when a story doesn't work?
Oh, I've had that happen a few times, and more than a few times. You get an idea in your head, you get started on the groundwork for the reporting, and sometimes, you might even, I'm just getting a little ahead here, but you might look in retrospect, you're like, you know what, the story did work, and I just had a preconceived notion of what it was supposed to be. It was supposed to have this many voices, say you wanted 5 or 7, and you can only find 2 people to speak on it, and then you felt like it was insufficient. So anyway, but that's more speaking to the regret of when you decided a story didn't work, and maybe it did. I guess because you're trying to. This is something that's been apparent to me a few times. You're trying to write the lead. You're trying to really get into it. Or, for those listening, the lead is your introduction. Then below that, in a well-rounded story, you often have what's called the nut graph, which is what kind of your scene setter. You're giving the stakes for what. Say this side says this and this side says this, and contextually data has shown this. So all this is happening in this, and you're giving the overview right there. And if that isn't readily apparent when you're starting off and looking through your notes, and you just I'm not really someone who deals with writer's block often, and I wouldn't even call that writer's block. It's just the idea blocks itself. The idea crumbles, or it's stagnant. And then I guess it's better to know if a story doesn't work before you've done it than after, and it's been out there and you've really tried to force this thing through and get your point across. And, you find the reception to it is just awful, or you hear from somebody that's the thing that makes your stomach drop. You get that email that says, hey, I've studied this, or I know this, my best friend did this thesis on this, and you really should have looked. I wish you would have come and asked. And that's every reporter's regret, right? Yeah. So that's when you really know maybe something didn't work as planned. But yeah, I think it'll often make itself evident that, this isn't working that great. And frankly, it takes a better reporter or writer to know that than to assume everything is going to be an easily fleshed out story. It's supposed to challenge you. And just sometimes you got to be willing to admit you were wrong about your idea. Maybe it's not coming together the right way.
So you're studying at Morgan State University. I am an alumni. Throw my name around, and people, they throw flowers and peel the grapes and all of this stuff. Just do it. It'll be a great ride for you. I heard there's an interesting story of how you got there to Morgan. Tell me more about that. And for those, since this is an audio platform, describe yourself for those who may not be aware.
Yeah, I don't know how big of an elephant in the room this is here in the city, but I'm a white dude, and I enrolled as a full-time student at Morgan State University this past, starting this past August. So I'm studying city and regional planning at the school. It's an HBCU. I would say that to what you just brought up, that's a little more noticeable, I think, in the undergrad population than among the graduate students. A lot of the programs are, it's a mix of white and Hispanic, Asian, international, and then of course black Marylanders and black Americans, just all in the same program. It is funny, going to the gym there. I do that 3 days a week, and I've had a powerlifting coach end his session with the students and be like, "All right, good job, white boy." I'm there in the corner, like, "Thank you, sir." That's about it. And I wouldn't even call that alienating. I would just say it's funny, and it reminds you, you're the odd man out. Anyway, it's been an absolutely wonderful experience so far. So I found my way to Morgan State. While I guess I never really thought about city planning when I was an undergraduate student, studying communications and working for the student newspaper. But serving as an editor at the Business Journal gave me plenty of experience looking historically at how things have been built and designed in the city. And Baltimore's kind of ground zero for a lot of these things, like redlining, legally permitted segregation. We had that pioneering ordinance. It was 1917. So all these things really got me thinking about, I always wanted to go back to grad school. I didn't know if journalism was the right fit or the best option for me to go back and study. But I really started thinking about city planning, and so we had 2 graduate programs here in Maryland. And honestly, I never really figured out if I wanted to go full-time or part-time. And I ended up, getting an offer for some financial aid and to work with the school and with the department and help with some research that is proving really interesting. So that's how I made this, life transition, 7 years as a reporter and editor, and decided to just jump in and go right back to school while staying active writing. And so far it's been great learning, things like history of city planning, using Excel for population projections, and, everything from the wonky to the high level stuff that's really interesting and good for kind of bar talk, things like that.
I think those 2 things, having the background and like journalism and writing, and kind of having a specific area that you're research at, those 2 things just go together. And it's like, oh yeah, you can now definitely research more rather and uncover these different things or present these different things in a journalistic point of view. And it's like, it's really shitty, and really touch it. Like, so let's revisit redlining. Let's hit this, the Baltimore butterfly or the Baltimore L real quick. Let's talk about that, guys.
Yeah. I mean, I can offer an example too. Like, one of my assignments was to pick a park in the city and tie it to the movements we're learning about city and urban planning. And I picked Preston Gardens because it's just such an oddball park down there. For those who aren't familiar, it's off St. Paul, right in front of Mercy. You'll see it. It's this linear park that you've probably driven by a bunch. It's got these very ornate staircases and some fountains. And I went, I dove back into the news clippings from the Baltimore Sun and the News American from, we're talking 1908 when they start talking about this, and how public perceptions of what green space are, and things like parking. Some of these arguments we're still having today, and then other things it was celebrated as this beautiful thing of the time, and then seeing how city policy has allowed that park to really deteriorate or get sandwiched in between one-way roads and no longer being a park that you really want to go hang out at. That's right. An example of where journalism and this research and this academic focus really dovetailed. And it's been fun so far. I'm only 11 weeks in or so, but very much enjoying it.
Yeah, it sounds like it's tying things together or what have you. It's like, oh yeah, that makes sense now. Like, oh, this is happening. I see this now. Now I better have a better understanding of it. And it's like, oh, yeah, right. It's like that thought bubble or that light bulb goes off. Yeah. So now I have 2 more questions before I get into the rapid fire ones. If you could live a completely different life, like maybe profession, maybe area, so on, which would you choose? Break it down as far as you want to break it down.
Sure. I grew up playing basketball, obsessed with basketball. Just it was what I lived and breathed. Thought I, would be the childhood dream you get. I'm going to play basketball at University of North Carolina, and then I'll go to the NBA. Things don't pan out for most of us, but what I got really into as a kid was reading biographies. I think that was when I started thinking, hey, writing is really interesting. It can be beautiful while also being factual. Some of this nonfiction coverage of people's lives. So if I could revisit things, I probably would have carved out an academic focus on history and stuck to basketball, thinking of basketball historians, thinking of people who feed the information to the National Basketball Hall of Fame, who I mean, the NBA is celebrating 75 years right now, and they're doing all of this, all of these callbacks to the greatest players and teams and these moments in NBA history, which is like gold every time I'm watching. Now that the season's back on and I'm watching and listening, I'm like, God, if I could only go back and just say, this is what I'm going to do. This is something I'll just make it happen. Something you just make happen out of thin air.
Yeah.
So that would be I don't know how imaginative that is. That's assuming, I grew up in the same place, did the same things as a kid, but yeah, that's a fun, alternate reality to think about. But my life was all just basketball history,
That'd be great. And I like how maybe this is baseball related, but I think maybe when like Moneyball and all of this stuff was going on, it's like sports started realizing how important our stat nerds are. It's like, oh yeah, we need data to really like prove these barbershop conversations. And, going back to that 75, the 75th anniversary, just like, people are now debating who deserves to be in that top 75, and people are pulling out their analytics. Well, he scored this many points. His PPE was this. And it's like, all right, it's fine. His per 36 though. It's like they play less games of different competition. It's like, this is a very subjective list. Like, it's fine. So the last question I have is, if you were stranded on a tropical island, what are 2 things that you would have to bring with you, that you would have to have? I'm
going to go for the one that's going to get me some brownie points here. I'd probably want a picture of my wife or of my family, something like that. Depending on how long I'm going to be stranded there, I want to be looking at those faces that I love so much and that make me feel home if I'm stuck out and God knows where. And then, I do most of my writing nowadays, almost all of it except for school, on a laptop. But I would going to the most primitive and practical sense, I just want maybe let's say not one notebook, but a stack of little reporter notebooks, so that I have some bandwidth and some space to fill. And I would just want a chance to write. Obviously, this isn't thinking very practical. I'd probably want a knife, right? But no, probably want some tools. But no, those are the things that thinking creatively and romantically, those are the things that I would want to have with me.
It's like, a little knife, little spear, something to get these fish or whatever that might be
maybe
there.
Something to help me eat. I don't know, but let's go with the notebooks and the picture.
This is the worst episode of Survivor ever. It's like, I need some matches. Like,
guy's gonna last for like 36 hours.
Right. It's just like Wilson. It's like, why'd you bring this volleyball with you? What are you doing? So now I want to hit you with the rapid fire questions before we wrap up for today. And essentially, the way that these rapid fire questions work is it's an effort to kind of like have more of an inner peek inside of you as an individual. And it's just answers. You don't have to provide any extra context if you don't want to. If you want to, that's always fine as well. So the first question is, what is the best thing about our times? Like current day, what is the best about what we have going on current day?
I would say the level of analysis we're doing on what's culturally relevant across racial and economic lines. We're always being reminded to assess, why is this, today's story? What have we missed here? I think people are thinking with a more open mind, and even everything to like politicians now have PR teams that are requiring them to, hey, don't make this gas. People are going to remind you of this. It's just a better intellectual foundation for thinking about current events. How does this come across in terms of equity? Current events, policies, media products, how a newspaper frames something, how a piece of art is going to be received. All of these things, and it's probably because of the internet, right? You just have more voices and you have more stimulus for conversation, but it's just a hyper awareness. We've got people protesting critical race theory, which is like, it's such a little meta thing because critical race theory in many places it didn't even exist as an idea. It was just, are you teaching things according to the correct timeline of history or not? Now we've got again, this kind of meta warfare about critical race theory, which is just putting a label on something that should have been being taught anyway. So that's what I'm saying is actually a good thing. It's people are required to think a little deeper.
And even the terminology, it just automatically sounds like negative. It's like, look, are you just teaching history? Like, are you just teaching like accurate history? Well, about that, it's like what maybe last year we were covering on one of my other podcasts about pop culture and how certain entities were being dragged for having like really weird stuff, like some stuff that was old, some stuff that was newer. Case in point, it's like, Jimmy Kimmel was doing blackface at one point, like as Karl Malone, and we didn't really talk about that. Or the Golden Girls had this weird kind of homophobic thing in an episode, or 30 Rock. And I was like, do we need to keep that stuff in there? Do we need to add a disclaimer, or do we remove it? I was like, I want y'all to look messy. I want y'all to show that you didn't have a person in the room that may have said this is a bad idea. And some of it is varying timelines. Some of it is 5 years old. Some of it is 10 years old. Some is 30 years old. But when you start removing it, then it's just like, oh, I didn't know they did that. Well, I remember it. I'm 36. I remember these things. Like, what are you saying? And it's this sanitizing kind of thing, and it removes history, and it makes me think, and maybe it's just slippery slope, but I just think like it almost gives people license to say, well, this is the reality until it's not.
Yeah, I don't.
So you can pull up someone's tweets from 10 years ago to kind of take a shot at their character if they're doing something. Like, I remember Chrissy Teigen or what have you. She was talking about that girl, and that Courtney Stodden girl, and it was and it's like, why are you saying that? I was like, I remember when this was said. I was like, this isn't cool at all. And then we recently surfaced this. And it's just like, no, this was a thing. It sucked then. It still sucks. Like, why are we bringing this up because it's new? It always sucked.
But
next question.
But we're asking those questions, and that's it's a constant way of thinking.
Worst thing about our times currently. What do you think is on the other side of that coin?
Right. I think once we've had those conversations, we get very complacent. We say, we already addressed it. We had a defund the police movement last year. Meanwhile, cities are reversing these cuts to police budgets, things that progressive folks care about. Yeah. It's saying that the conversation was enough. That the symbolic, changing, what was it? Uncle Ben's changed their logo and kept Uncle Ben.
Uncle Ben's Aunt Jemima.
And they kept Uncle Ben. And anyway, it's just, we think that that's enough, and it doesn't. So I guess it's the other side of the coin, as you said. What is one of the best things is also the worst thing. We get very complacent. We have very short attention span. But maybe that's just what I should say: the short attention span that we all seem to have, and so much information coming at us. I think the Gen Zers will be really good at processing this stuff, maybe better than we can. They'll be like, their brains will be like more advanced computers when they're our age. This is me aging myself, by the way. Yeah. But they'll be better at having better attention spans and focusing on multiple things at once, because I think we forget very easily.
Yes. And I think there's also an element of sneak dissing that goes on there too. Like, as you put it, we were talking last year about defund the police. Now we're trying to rebrand it. Yeah, let's refund the police. Let's put like 28 million there. It's like, shut up. Like, or you have states like Florida, kind of pushing along this notion of, oh, well, feel free to come down if you haven't been vaccinated, if you're unable to go to work, and you can police here. It's like, this is not wise at all, actually.
It's a little dystopian. It's how when the attention span wears off, when the focus wears off, it's now this really like shocking dystopian reality that you might have been a little tangent in Huxley when you read it in high school, and now it's like literally playing out in front of us. So
it feels almost like when you're watching someone that's like a celebrity in a movie or a TV show, and it's like, look, you're polling down like public relations style. It's like, if we can just get past this first week, then we can go back to all the bullshit we were doing, beating up Negroes like hotcakes or whatever it may be. Okay, since you mentioned this, I took one of the questions out and I replaced it. Since you mentioned this, I didn't know this detail about you, so I had to ask. Favorite NBA player? Larry Bird. He ran himself into the ground just
which is like a really work ethic thing that I'm sadly very about. Very, the absolute teammate martyr, Larry, really putting himself out there. I also have I sprained my back last year and weirdly felt very connected to Larry after that happened, and building my strength back up. This is my little mini heroes playing basketball and getting back in shape. But every time I watch old clips of Larry Bird, I'm just thinking about how grueling and how grueling that was, and how much he loved what he was doing and how dedicated he was. So.
I like I just remember I saw some Larry towards the back end of his career, and it was always kind of that thing of who's the dope white boy, what have you. And I was like, no, Larry Bird is just Larry Bird. It wasn't one of those Larry things Bird. Of, he's just and I just remember that interview they had with him, I think when LeBron and Carmelo and maybe Dwayne Wade first got in the league, and he's like, yeah, when I was playing, it's like I kind of want the good guys after me. I don't want a white dude guarding me. And I was like, oh shit. And I was just like, wow. I was like, Larry for the three.
Yeah. I think
so it's points, sir.
Yeah. He, the way he played, it transcended race too. It's just, and that's I had friends nickname me Larry when I would play with them because I was just the dude playing among a bunch of other black dudes. So that name, that image, but really it goes much beyond race. Just looking back at how he played, it's unbelievable.
Absolutely.
Yeah, legendary.
When I think of the 3-point shot, I immediately think of Larry Bird. That's just what it is, what have you, for me. And also one of the better nicknames, forever, you have names that are just I think if it's a name that kind of rhymes,
or it rolls off the tongue,
Larry Bird,
Larry Legend.
Yeah, like Larry Bird. Yeah, Larry Legend, or the Hick from French Lick.
Uh-huh.
That is a fire nickname. Oh, yeah. It's in that same class of the round mound of rebound. Mm-hmm. Those are fire nicknames, like the Charles Barkley's nickname. Those are fire nicknames. Yeah. Favorite font?
This is so lame, but I'm of the AIM generation, and you could change it. Is it Trebuchet? Trebuchet? Is that how that's said? Trebuchet MS? And
you see the look on my face right here. It's just okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, I was like, oh, this is cool or this is what my cool friend, this is how he types. So weirdly, yeah, that's my font.
Okay. I thought you were going to be an Arial person, or you're Times New Roman.
It's that's the default, okay. Trebuchet MS, if I'm saying that right, is how, that's an expressive font to me, which is hilarious because it's so boring. But yeah, that'd be your expressive alternative.
See, now that question could have been really weird, describe yourself as a font. That's a whole different situation.
Yeah. I would just say wingdings and not explain. Yeah.
Yes, wingdings, no context. Next question. Last question here. Social media DMs or email?
As in the best way to get in touch?
What is your preferred way of having someone kind of get through the fodder and get directly to you? What is that most preferred way?
Yeah, I guess, I'm active enough on Twitter, so that could be they reply to me or they DM me. Yeah, Twitter is a chance. I put up a photo of my cat there this morning and then tweeted out a clip for the Outlaw Report that I had written. So it mixes the fun and the work. And so that's a good place to keep it real, I think. I like to think. Twitter's also ridiculous, but yeah, that's my favorite way to get in touch.
I've learned of different subsets of colorist black Twitter. It's there's light skin Twitter. I was like, what is light skin Twitter? It was I've heard of black Twitter. I was like, I need to do a deeper dive into the Twitter nonsense because I feel like I'm missing a whole branch of comedy.
Oh man. Yeah. The comedy on Twitter is so good. Yeah. It's the comedy on there is great, but obviously it's also an extremely chaotic place that can be just, terrible. Yeah, that's
all that I had. So I want to open up the floor for you to share, promote anything, social media, anything that you have coming up. And thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. As for, keeping up, I'm a regular freelancer for these days. It's for Baltimore Magazine. So I've been having a piece for them about once a month. Just using it to, I've been writing about things like infrastructure and road design, stuff that's not necessarily regularly in your your monthly glossy. So it's a fun place to put that stuff out there and tell some stories along the way. If you care about cannabis news, please follow the Outlaw Report. It's it's a trope, but it's something that's being taken more seriously, because soon it's going to be just like your, or maybe if you already live in somewhere like Colorado or Washington or California, it already is like your neighborhood liquor store. It's just there, and it's a huge changing field. And I'm at Ethan F. McLeod on Twitter, and please engage. Hit me up.
So there you have it, folks. I'm Rob Lee for Ethan F. McLeod, saying that there's art in and around Baltimore. You just have to look for it.